Well, Holly, thank you so much for being here and being on Retail TV. We're so excited to have you here and to do this interview with you. I've been reading all about you, and now I get to see you in well, at least on digital real life. Uh, so it's so nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. Well, I'm going to jump right in. Your background is so interesting. You've got all these different points of places that you've been and things that you've done, and I'm going to jump right in and just ask you to tell us a little bit about your approach overall, just to growth marketing and what you see as the biggest challenge to SaaS marketers, software as a service marketers, and what they face today.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'll start with the second half of that question because it kind of leads into the rest of it. There are so many SaaS solutions out there and trying to break into the market and dominate the space. And I think that the biggest challenge really for marketers is that there's so much noise being presented to buyers. And problems get solved for buyers in so many different ways that it can be really difficult for them to try to figure out what the right solution would be for them and whether the solution would be solving their problem for them in the way that they need it to. And there's many different ways to skin a cat, so the phrase goes. And so um, it can just be very challenging for them on their journey to understand whether the solution that you're marketing, if when they find you, is actually the right one for them. And then secondly, tying to that point, it's that the content marketing is extremely important today, but also has a lot of challenges associated with it because um, number one, it's very costly to produce enough content to keep relevant and to keep yourself constantly pushing out fresh information into the marketplace. But then secondarily, how do you make sure that you're getting it into your customers' hands? I or your prospective buyers' hands. I tend to work mostly with startups, and so a lot of them don't have any brand awareness, and there may or may not be a leader in their particular space unless they're creating a category. And so, trying to understand with very fundamental tools what mechanisms that you could use in order to get your content into the hands of buyers is a real challenge for them. My approach to growth marketing really starts again with the fundamentals. Since I'm sort of a transformation agent for these organizations, I often engage with a startup company in the very early stages of their development. So I really have to start with fundamentals with them and start from a really solid core plan of making sure that we really understand the customer, we really understand how the customer, that we can reach that customer, and then um, help them to understand that really focusing on certain segments and focusing on their differentiators is important for their growth. The tendency kind of tends to be, well, I want to tell them everything about my solution and look, if there's a leader in the market, I want to look kind of like that leader. And it's like, no, 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 you want to break away and really make some waves in the marketplace by talking about something that solves the problem but really sets you apart. So that can be a real challenge for the startup companies to maintain that focus, not chase opportunistic opportunities, and instead really focus on the markets that they're the strongest at having a fit with.
How do you approach that to even become the leader of and I know you keep there's not a silver bullet and there's not like that one like thing that's going to turn it on, but what is like a way that you can approach to become like a little bit more successful, become a little bit more successful at becoming the leader of
Mm-hmm.
that niche, that industry, that area.
Well, I can give you a good example of a company that I worked with that was breaking into a space that was very much dominated by one major player in the marketplace. And as I engaged with the company, what I realized was that everyone from uh, the analysts, the industry analysts of that marketplace, to the other players that were trying to capture market share from that big leader were, you know, defining the market in a very specific way that left out a whole other set of capabilities that wasn't addressed by those solutions. So I went and first engaged with all the leading industry analysts in that space because they were an important part of the sales cycle in terms of advising potential buyers. So and I challenged their market definition and said, well, I understand that you are looking at this market in this very simplistic way, but that only applies to a B2C type of a use case. And you're leaving out the whole B2B market case, which is much more complex and much more high value when it comes to ASPs and the longer term engagement with different kinds of companies. It was very interesting because at first I got a lot of pushback, but I was just persistent with them about that they had misdefined the market, and lo and behold that they redefined their market definitions and started to really open their eyes. And in fact, the leader in that space now is starting to expand their solution set in order to cover the gaps in their solution. So the company that I was working with, we picked that fight and we made it very specific that we were not going after B2C customers, we were going after B2B, and that we understood the B2B problem much more successfully or much more in depth than the other solutions in the marketplace. So that helped us have a differentiated message, that helped us to be much more specific with companies that the simpler solutions weren't working for, and really put the company on the map when it came to achieving some brand awareness and getting a following. They're not the leader yet. That does take time, takes a lot of time, and a very persistent and constant focus on that particular segment that you're focusing on. But I think if you really try to own a particular segment and stick to it, then the leadership can come from there.
When it starts to get off track, how do you pull people back in?
Well, you have to look at different signals. If it's getting off track, it may be that you personally need to adjust the plan and revisit your segments and ensure that you're really focusing on the right segment and that there's a market there. But absent that, I think pulling people back into, I mean, you make a really good point. Oftentimes I work with executives who this is, with a startup company, this is their baby. And if they don't feel like the baby's developing in the right way, they're going to get very, very nervous. And so in the early stages, you have to let the, show progress where you can, whether it's, we've gotten a certain number of leads that the sales team needs to take on now, or okay, we can tweak the messaging a little bit, but we're going to stay with these segments, and talk about how you've got a certain limited amount of budget and time and resources in order to allocate toward this growth plan, and it's better to follow a plan than it is to randomly look for opportunities in different markets that you really don't have any brand name awareness and may not even be looking for your solution.
You have come from an executive level at having worked at both Oracle and SAP, two little known companies. And you've done some incredible work there at both of them, with demand gen and branding and I mean, building all kinds of, the list goes on and on of what you've done at these companies, and being now a growth marketer. How have you seen all of that work and now what you do, both support what you do and then also grow and flourish into new things that you're now doing?
Yeah, the interesting thing about having done global roles at SAP and Oracle is that you see how the very mature large organizations have evolved and dominate their space, and that's great experience in order to understand what the startup company needs to strive for over the long term. And I was lucky, as you say, enough to be able to be engaged in branding, demand generation, product marketing, strategy, partner marketing, partner relations, a whole gamut of things in the enterprise software space. So I can bring to that, to a startup, I can bring that breadth of experience to help them to understand the full portfolio of what they need to have presented to an enterprise level customer in order to look like a credible solution that they might want to purchase. So the way that that tends to translate is that when I engage with an organization, as I said before, they tend to not have had a lot of formal marketing in place as of yet, or if they have, it's been very much focused only on demand generation and not necessarily the branding and the enterprise level messaging. And so because I've lived and breathed that for 20 odd years, I can help to transform a very technical message to an enterprise level message that helps a C-level buyer understand the strategic value of the solution. Yes, the functions and the features are very important, but only important enough only important if they're making the buying organization better or faster or more cost effective. And so, and giving them, some kind of a competitive advantage. So that transformation tends to be really exciting for the startup company because they haven't really they've understood, say, cost cutting for their solution or making a process better, but they haven't necessarily had the organizational knowledge around the strategic value and how to really speak to a C-level executive about their solution. So that's been really helpful. And then understanding also the brand, very often when I engage with an organization, I have to help them to understand how to transform their brand into something that presents in a more professional or more enterprise level way. So I've taken everything from like consulting oriented brands or just very techie brands that look like they may have been designed on a PowerPoint presentation and transform those to have a very enterprise level look and feel and to communicate to the marketplace in a much more enterprise way.
If you were to boil maybe down to like one or two, not that that there's only one or two, but maybe just one or two that you can share of best practices that you really advocate for on with your teams, what would you say?
So I think the first best practice that I really advocate for is that there has to be a really strong collaborative and mutually accountable working relationship with the sales organization. Sales is really the first customer of marketing, right? The prospective buyers are maybe the second customer, but sales is very much the first customer. And I've heard way too many stories about marketing organizations that have been convinced for whatever reason that their messaging and their tactics and their plans are 100% what they need to be, and the sales organization just needs to get in line. And that creates an environment where it just is, it's going to end in tears eventually, right? And so that doesn't mean you have to always agree with the sales organization and do everything that the sales organization asks for. It's a negotiation, right? And so, but as long as the sales organization has some transparency into my plans and why I'm planning the way that I am, what my thinking is, and they're open to being educated as well, then I think you can have a really great relationship that where problems can be risen up to be discussed, and you can really solve those problems much more effectively and be more effective in going to market. In terms of the second practice, I think that I question everything, meaning that I don't assume that the messaging that my understanding of the solution in the marketplace is always 100% correct, and that I need to really listen both to people internally that have concerns about what the marketing looks like, but also externally, and to not, so I try to develop an atmosphere of, we're quite busy when we're in a startup organization. We're always focused on the 20 tasks that we have in front of us and the 3 jobs that we're trying to handle, but with one person. However, it's very important to make sure that you stay apprised of the news in the marketplace, who's buying solutions, and listen to the feedback that the marketplace is giving you. And we're so lucky to live in a time where that information is often readily available, or that there's ways of getting to it that can really help you. And so that you're sticking to your plan, but you're also constantly evolving how you approach the marketplace, such that you're really speaking to what the needs are.
I have to go down this path, at least just a little bit, and then we'll get back into it. But what do you love about ABM, and what do you find challenging?
What I love about ABM is that you need to be very focused on a particular buyer in an organization, and get very close to their way of thinking and what they need to hear. Too often, I think that technology marketing can be a bit sterile, and not really recognize that there's a buyer on the other side of that transaction that needs to feel important, needs to feel like you care about their problems, and needs to feel like you're going to do everything you can to support them. What I don't like about ABM is that it can be very challenging to do that in a scalable way, especially if you're in a startup and you don't have a lot of resources. So, and it also forces the sales and marketing team and the executive team to make some really hard choices about who they're going to pursue and who they aren't going to pursue. So the internal cultural challenges and the limited ability of a startup can be challenging in the ABM context.
Things I can see is how quickly technology, especially in ABM, is still too much automation, and it's not triggering that human approach enough to say, okay, now you need to actually pick up the phone and call someone. It's like a little too automated in certain respects. So I love that piece, and I think there's so much there still to grow and to happen there.
Well, if I can say one thing about that too, is when I develop personas for a particular company and solution, I always put a section in those personas about what they personally want. And people sometimes kind of give me strange looks for, well, why would I care about whether they want a promotion or not? Well, you know what I mean? It's like, well, they don't want to pick the wrong solution that impacts their reputation, right? Or why would I care that they want to spend more time with their grandkids? I don't necessarily put that specific information in the persona, but the point being, everyone wants to work less. And so speaking to their ability to save time and to be more efficient, and the benefits for them of doing that is also important. And yeah, I think it's going to take people a little time, but I really hope to see a lot more humanness in tech marketing, because it really needs to be there.
So I'm also curious about when things, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. So when things take a right or a left turn, or even a U-turn, when you're doing a campaign or a program, and let's say it's not working, and you got to take a step back and reassess things. What are the signs or the triggers or things that you suggest to a team and maybe it's time to take a pivot, or look at your core aspect of your marketing and say, okay, this is what we need to do now. How do you approach that?
This might seem like a bit of an odd signal, but I've worked with organizations that really have had great results from SEO and SEM kinds of tactics. We had done a relaunch of the organization and shifted the messaging to be much more strategic, and the branding to be much more enterprise level. But the SEO results started to fall off on a month-to-month basis. And so what we realized was that we had gone a bit too far into streamlining the messaging and not deep enough into some of the capabilities and having more information about the capabilities and individual things that people would be looking for that were applicable to our solution. So that was a big signal that it was great that we had this more enterprise level messaging, but now we needed to really expand that and ensure that we were able to pull in very significant leads based upon the SEO and SEM tactics that were going into place. I think another signal is when if you start to lose the sales organization, or if they are not wanting to even try the tools that you're giving them, then that is a big signal that you need to kind of sit down with them and understand what the source of that problem is, right? Do they really have knowledge that you didn't incorporate, that you just didn't know about for some reason? Or sometimes you encounter cowboy salespeople that they just want to do. They want to do things the way they want to do them. And I don't really have an issue with cowboy salespeople if they're being effective. But if they're not moving pipeline and they're not closing deals, then that can be a big signal that you need to internally realign and ensure that people understand why the messaging is the way that it is and why the sales tools are the way they are. Yeah, I guess the other big signal would be if you're not collecting the level of leads that you're expecting, the type of people that are that you're really trying to target and get it high enough in the organization to help the ASP be higher, then you need to go back and revisit what you're doing in terms of your tactics and your messaging in order to attract those people and be in the forums where they're going to be looking for a solution.
I'd love to also know, in the case of where a company is scaling or moving up market from selling to other startups and into selling to enterprise, how do you make that transition, and what challenges are the toughest there?
So yes, companies are starting to move up and selling to mid-range or small businesses up to the enterprise. There's two ways that they need to think about approaching that. The first is, I'm going to upscale my marketing to speak to a larger organization and what they're concerned about, and make sure that I'm presenting my solution in a credible way, and the organization in a credible way as well. And so that usually involves, for a startup, a whole new set of all of the sales tools that the marketing team provides, as well as, frankly, a whole new set of leads, because they typically haven't had those contacts in their database to be nurturing. But I think the actual more interesting strategy and path that companies sometimes really don't spend enough time on is cross-selling and upselling, and really understanding that they may have sold to an enterprise, to a department in Indiana, but that it's a global enterprise. And so how do you take that success that you've had with a particular office or that particular department and expand into the rest of the account, or bring on new features and capabilities that they desire and want. And so that requires a level of focus on the customer that is shifting away from just acquiring new logos into really getting much closer to the customer, bringing in either the professional services organization or the customer success organization to that really has a sales bent to it, in order to find those opportunities to expand the solution within a particular organization. And yeah, I don't, to me, that is where a lot of startups struggle with spending enough time, because they feel like if they just have more logos and more logos and more logos, then they're going to be more successful. But sometimes the success path is much shorter. You just have to spend some time to develop it within the particular organization.
Oh, wow. Okay, I got one last question for you, and
Okay.
it's going to be a fun one, I think, anyway. And it's about go-to-market strategy. It's simple. It kind of geeks me out. I think it geeks you out too, which is around what steps to take to make sure that you can execute on it on a go-to-market strategy effectively. Do you have some tips, some ways that everyone listening can just like walk away and go, oh my God, that's the thing I've been missing, or some things that they can put in place that you definitely want to make sure that you have every time you go to do it.
Yeah. So again, we're in my particular situation, I'm talking about mostly startup companies, and the companies that I have seen really struggle with go to market and not achieve the growth that they're looking for are those that really are having challenges with partnership strategies. Direct selling is, obviously very important and quite often the bread and butter of a startup company. However, you need friends in the marketplace to number one, just expand the reach of your messaging and your solution, expand the reach of your market. And those that have not been successful at either focusing enough on the partner strategy, or for whatever reason haven't garnered the enthusiasm from the partners. Like maybe they have partnerships in place, but the partners aren't actively promoting those solutions for whatever reason, can be, those are the ones that have challenges. So I would say, really spend some time thinking through the partner strategy, get the right kinds of people into place to help you to expand your partner network, and then spend just as much time on the partnership aspect as you do on the direct sales aspect. So that would be one tip. The other tip is that having a repeatable process between the sales and marketing organizations with key points that you're measuring the effectiveness of the go-to-market process is really critical, because otherwise there's a tendency for people to sort of focus on whatever the lead of the day is, or the activity of the day, and not focus enough on, am I making sure that my process is working effectively? And for startups, that can be really challenging because they're not necessarily used to a lot of process. And so incorporating that discipline into the organization and ensuring that at least, every other week, the executive team is looking at that process and measuring the effectiveness of it, I think is also really important.
I love those two, and I love how you said everyone needs friends.
Yeah, it's true.
So thank you for sharing all of this and for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you as well. I had a really nice time, and I really enjoyed the conversation.